Picture this, if you will, that fateful morning when everything in my world tilted on its axis. The kind of dawn where the birds are just starting to chirp their lazy melodies, and the dew clings to the grass like tiny diamonds under the first blush of sunlight. But for me, it was no ordinary wake-up call. No, I bolted upright in bed, my heart thumping wildly against my ribs, as if it knew something catastrophic had unfolded while I slept, a premonition that dragged me out into the crisp air of my backyard in Oakwood Estates, where the apiary I'd built with my own hands over countless weekends stood like a silent sentinel, rows of wooden hives humming faintly with the promise of life inside. Yet as I approached, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the horror revealed itself in slow, agonizing detail, the storage shelves that should have been groaning under the weight of gleaming jars filled with golden, viscous honey now barren, stripped clean, leaving only faint sticky residues and a faint, mocking scent of sweetness hanging in the air. A violation so profound it felt like someone had reached into my chest and yanked out a piece of my soul. Because those jars weren't just produce. They were the culmination of years of dedication, of early mornings tending to the bees, watching them dance their intricate waggle dances, harvesting with care to ensure their colonies thrived, a passion that had become my anchor in a chaotic world. And now, in the blink of an eye, it was gone, shattered by some unseen thief who had no regard for the sweat, the stings, the sheer love poured into every drop. I stood there, frozen in the growing light, my mind racing through a whirlwind of emotions, shock giving way to a simmering anger that bubbled up from deep within, the kind that makes your fists clench involuntarily and your thoughts turn dark, wondering who could be so brazen, so heartless, to invade this sacred space, this extension of my family life where my kids had learned about nature's miracles, helping me bottle the honey with wide-eyed wonder, turning it into gifts for neighbors, or sales at local markets that brought in a little extra for family vacations. And just as that rage threatened to consume me, she emerged from the shadows of the adjacent property line, striding across the manicured lawn with the confidence of someone who owned not just her plot, but the entire neighborhood. Victoria Hargrove, the self-appointed queen bee of the Oakwood Estates Association, her posture ramrod straight, her lips curled in that perpetual smirk of superiority, clutching one of my pilfered jars like it was her birthright, her voice cutting through the morning quiet with a tone that dripped condescension and entitlement, proclaiming that the honey was now community property under the auspices of some obscure bylaw she'd likely twisted to suit her whims, justifying her theft as a contribution to the greater good of the association's coffers, her eyes locking onto mine with a challenge that dared me to object. And in that instant, the air thickened with tension, a silent standoff where her shameless audacity clashed against my mounting fury, leaving me speechless, the words caught in my throat as she turned on her heel and sauntered away, the jar glinting mockingly in the sunlight, igniting a fire within me that wouldn't be easily quenched. As the reality sank in, I paced the empty apiary, my footsteps crunching on the gravel path I'd laid myself, each step fueling the inner monologue that raged like a storm. How dare she, this woman who turned our peaceful suburb into her personal fiefdom, imposing fines for the slightest infractions, like the time she slapped a penalty on old Mr. Jenkins for his bird feeder attracting nuisance wildlife, or when she mandated uniform mailbox colors that clashed with everyone's aesthetic, all while exempting her own pristine yard from scrutiny. And now she'd crossed into my domain, targeting the bees that were more than a hobby. They were my therapy, my connection to the earth, a legacy I hope to pass on, their honey symbolizing patience and hard work in a world obsessed with instant gratification. And as I glanced toward the dense thicket of blackwood wilderness that bordered our development, a wild expanse of towering pines and underbrush where black bears wandered freely, not as threats, but as part of the natural tapestry, their lumbering forms occasionally spotted foraging for berries or raiding unsecured trash bins, an idea began to germinate in the fertile soil of my resentment. Something devious yet detached, a plan that whispered of justice, served not by my hands, but by the impartial forces of nature, sweeter than any honey. Laced with a hint of dark humor at the thought of her facing consequences she couldn't bully her way out of, because sometimes, when the system fails you, you have to let the wild take the wheel. Folks, if you've ever been on the receiving end of such blatant injustice, where someone in power treats your efforts like their entitlement, you know that gut twist of helplessness mixed with defiance. Drop a comment below sharing your own HOA horror stories. And if this tale of subtle rebellion resonates, smash that subscribe button for more cinematic retellings where the everyday hero turns the tables. Because believe me, this is only the setup, and the drama is about to unfold in ways that will leave you cheering, laughing, and maybe even questioning the fine line between revenge and restitution. To truly understand the depths of this conflict, we have to rewind a little further, delving into the history of Victoria's reign of terror over Oakwood Estates, a once idyllic community of neat homes and friendly barbecues that she'd transformed into a pressure cooker of rules and resentments. Her role as association president not elected through fair vote, but seized through relentless campaigning and subtle intimidations, where she'd find residents for holiday decorations lingering a day too long, or for parking RVs in driveways that spoiled the curb appeal. Her newsletters arriving like edicts from a distant monarch, filled with passive-aggressive reminders and veiled threats. But it was her personal vendettas that stung the most, like when she targeted the young couple down the street for their vegetable garden, deeming it an eyesore despite it providing fresh produce for the block. Or how she'd hover at community events, micromanaging every detail from the punch bowl to the playlist, ensuring her vision dominated. And for me, the bees had always been off-limits, a quiet corner of my life where I could escape her reach, tending to the hives in the golden hours of dawn, the gentle buzz a symphony that drowned out the world's noise, each jar of honey a testament to resilience, to the miracle of pollination that sustained our gardens and orchards, infused with floral notes from the wildflowers bordering Blackwood wilderness, making it not just a product but a piece of art, a soul-soothing elixir that I'd share with friends over coffee, recounting tales of bee behavior that fascinated and humbled. Yet Victoria saw it as an opportunity, a resource to exploit for her endless fundraisers and brunches, crossing that invisible line of decency without a second thought, her actions not just theft but a desecration of something profoundly personal. The value of that honey ran deeper than its sweetness. It was woven into the fabric of my family. Memories of my late father teaching me the basics of beekeeping on his rural farm, passing down tools and knowledge that I now shared with my own children, watching their faces light up as they suited up in protective gear, carefully extracting frames without harming a single bee, turning the process into lessons on ecology, patience, and the interconnectedness of life. And in tougher times when work stresses mounted or bills piled up, the apiary was my refuge, a place where problems dissolved amid the hum, the honey sales providing not just income, but a sense of accomplishment, of contributing something pure to a tainted world. So when Victoria struck, it wasn't merely material loss. It was an emotional gut punch, a betrayal that amplified every past slight. Her continued raids only pouring salt into the wound, as she'd return under the guise of inspections, helping herself to more jars, distributing them at meetings with a flourish, rebranding my labor as her generosity, her voice booming with false warmth as neighbors accepted the gifts warily, their eyes darting to me with unspoken sympathy. And through it all, I maintained composure, a facade of calm while internally the storm brewed, plotting not rash retaliation but a calculated patience, letting the injustice marinate. The love for my bees and family fueling a resolve that blended righteous anger with a sly amusement at the absurdity of it all, because who expects a suburban feud to involve wildlife? Yet here we were, on the cusp of a showdown where nature would level the playing field. Shifting gears into the heart of this saga, where the wild elements truly entered the fray, let's talk about Blackwood Wilderness, that sprawling, untamed forest that hugged the edges of Oakwood Estates like a protective barrier, home to deer that grazed at dusk, foxes that slinked through the undergrowth, and most notably, the black bears, magnificent creatures with glossy coats and inquisitive snouts. Not the bloodthirsty predators of horror tales, but opportunistic foragers with a notorious weakness for sweets, drawn to beehives in the wild or picnic baskets left unattended. Their presence a reminder that civilization's grasp was tenuous at best. And as I contemplated my options, wrestling with the moral quandaries in the quiet of my study, staring at maps of the area while sipping tea laced with my remaining honey, the plan coalesced not as direct sabotage, but as a passive invitation. Scattering excess honey, spills from harvests, imperfect batches, near the tree-line, allowing the wind to carry the intoxicating scent deeper into the woods. Not baiting per se, but facilitating a natural convergence, a way to let fate intervene without crossing legal lines. The inner turmoil palpable as guilt flickered alongside satisfaction, questioning if this was vengeance or merely accelerating inevitable consequences, yet to buy tragedy of her unchecked greed. The unfairness that threatened my family's harmony tipped the scales toward action, laced with a humorous irony that she'd meet her match in something as unassuming as a bear's sweet tooth. The inaugural clash unfolded at her much-hyped brunch, a lavish affair in the community pavilion where white tablecloths fluttered in the breeze, silverware clinking as residents mingled awkwardly under her watchful eye. Victoria at the center, unveiling platters drizzled with what she dubbed Victoria's golden delight, my honey repurposed as her signature spread on scones and cheeses. Her speech effusive about unity and shared resources, the air thick with forced politeness. But then, from the forest fringe, a rustle grew into a presence, a hulking black bear emerging with deliberate steps, his nose twitching at the airborne allure, ambling straight into the gathering without malice. Just hunger guiding his path, toppling chairs and tables in a comedic cascade of flying croissants and spilled mimosas, screams piercing the air as attendees scattered like leaves in a gale. And there was Victoria, her poise shattering like fine china, arms waving wildly in a futile bid to assert dominance, her commands about respecting association boundaries falling on deaf ears as the bear nonchalantly lapped up the bounty, his furry indifference a hilarious counterpoint to her hysteria. The scene unfolding in slow-motion chaos that had me observing from my window, a mix of adrenaline-fueled tension and suppressed chuckles, the bear's visit not harming a soul, but dismantling her event in spectacular fashion, leaving behind a trail of destruction that mirrored the emotional wreckage she'd inflicted on me. Undeterred, or perhaps blinded by ego, Victoria spun the narrative in her favor, convening emergency meetings where she pointed accusatory fingers at my apiary, claiming the bees were the root of all wildlife woes, labeling me a negligent neighbor in emails that circulated like wildfire, positioning herself as the beleaguered victim besieged by forces beyond her control. Her dramatic retellings embellished with sighs and hand-wringing that bordered on theatrical, and I couldn't help but find a grim amusement in her self-victimization, how she twisted facts to suit her story, alienating allies in the process. The community's murmurs growing louder, yet she pressed on, organizing a yoga retreat to restore equilibrium. Mats unfurled perilously close to the woods, as if taunting the wild, her voice guiding sun salutations with strained serenity. But nature, ever the equalizer, responded in kind, the bear returning with reinforcements, perhaps a companion drawn by lingering scents. Crashing the session mid-downward dog, sending participants into a frenzy of rolled mats and toppled water bottles. Victoria's shrieks echoing as she berated the beasts about private property violations, her HOA edicts clashing absurdly against the immutable laws of the forest, the irony so rich it elicited involuntary smirks even amid the panic. The escalation building to a crescendo where her authority frayed at the edges, members whispering of resignation, the tension coiling tighter as her desperation mounted, blending by tragedy with the satisfaction of watching a bully's facade crack under pressure. As the association began to fracture, with longtime residents voicing frustrations at endless disruptions tied to her honey heists. Victoria's power eroded like sandcastles at high tide. Her once commanding presence met with eye rolls and side conversations, the inner conflict within me intensifying, pity for her self-inflicted downfall warring with the righteous fire of seeing justice unfold. The love for my family and B's a constant anchor. Yet the drama peaked when she stooped to outright deception, creeping into my yard under night's veil, her silhouette captured in the moon's pale glow as she doused decoy hives with pilfered honey, fabricating evidence of my carelessness to sway opinion. Her movements furtive and frantic, a far cry from her daytime bravado. But unbeknownst to her, my newly installed cameras worked silently, documenting every damning second. A pivotal twist that shifted the narrative irrevocably, the suspense hanging heavy as I reviewed the footage, heart racing with a blend of triumph and trepidation, knowing this was the ammunition to end her tyranny once and for all. The climax erupted at the subsequent association assembly, held in the stuffy community hall where folding chairs squeaked under shifting weights. The atmosphere electric with anticipation as I queued up the video, projecting it onto the wall like a blockbuster reveal, the room plunging into stunned silence as Victoria's nocturnal escapade played out in high definition. Her furtive glances, the deliberate spills, the hasty retreat, her face paling as denials sputtered forth, only to be met with ripples of laughter, not mocking but liberating, the kind that releases pent-up frustrations, her protest swallowed by the swelling tide of disapproval, culminating in a swift vote that ousted her from the presidency, the hall erupting in relieved chatter as she stormed out, her empire reduced to rubble by her own hubris. And in that moment, a wave of catharsis washed over me, the tragedy of her fall tempered by the undeniable justice, the tension dissolving into a profound sense of closure. Yet she wasn't one to bow out gracefully, escalating to the courts in a bid for vindication. Her lawsuit, a sprawling document of grievances that cast her as the martyr, arriving at the hearing swathed in a neck brace and oversized sunglasses. Her testimony laced with theatrical sobs about trauma and trespasses, her attorney weaving tales of association sovereignty clashing with reckless individualism. The courtroom thick with drama, as witnesses recounted the bare incursions. But when the video resurfaced, the judge's brow furrowed, probing questions dismantling her claims brick by brick, exposing the folly of equating HOA whims with legal imperatives. And with a resounding gavel strike, the case was dismissed, her theatrics rendered moot, a resounding victory that echoed the triumph of the oppressed. The villain finally reaping the whirlwind she'd sown. With the dust settled, Victoria faded into obscurity, her home listed and sold in hushed tones, moving vans departing under overcast skies as the neighborhood exhaled collectively, the Oakwood Estates Association reborn under fair leadership, fostering genuine community spirit, potlucks without politics, gardens blooming freely, my bees thriving undisturbed, their honey once more a symbol of harmony rather than contention. The family bonds strengthened through the ordeal, kids recounting the saga with wide-eyed excitement. And in a final, poetic gesture, I ventured to the wilderness edge at twilight, spotting a bear's distant form amid the trees, placing a jar of honey as an unspoken tribute, not born of grudge but gratitude for the role fate played in restoring equilibrium, a reminder that true strength lies not in domination but in coexistence, the wild's indifference a humbling force against human arrogance. Wrapping this epic tale, reflecting on the roller coaster of emotions, the heartache of loss, the thrill of cunning, the satisfaction of resolution, it's clear that sometimes, when systems fail, nature steps in to right the wrongs. But it leaves me pondering, and I genuinely love your take in the comments. In the grand scheme of ethics and justice, was nudging karma along truly righteous? Or does even justified payback risk tainting one's moral compass? Share your encounters with power-hungry neighbors. Hit like if you rooted for the Bears, and subscribe for more gripping stories. Thanks for joining this journey, everyone.